Hello and welcome to Kantipur Rise and Shine. My name is Prateebha Tuladhar. The Vanishing Act, a collection of short stories by Prawin Adhikhari, was released 2 weeks ago. It is his first book. Prawin is a writer, teacher and translator. He writes fiction, screenplays and has translated works like A Land of Our Own by Subhash Darnal and Chapters by Amod Bhattrai. Prawin is also the assistant editor at Lalit, a literary magazine. Joining me here in the studio today is the writer himself. Welcome to our show, Prawin.
Thank you, Prateebha.
How does it feel to have that book in front of you?
It feels really good. I hadn't expected how good it would feel to actually hold it in my hand for the first time, because because I work with Lalit, because I've translated a couple of books before, so I've seen my work in a book before. So I wasn't really excited about it as much as I should have been. But when I got the first consignment sent to me, I had to go to the DHL office to pick it up, and when I tore open the package and I picked one out, I actually felt proud for a little bit of myself, which was a nice feeling.
Did you get emotional about it?
I did. For about 20 seconds, I was quite emotional. Especially, it was it's just a book. But it's a nice book. It's nicely produced.
I like the way it feels, but what do you think about the cover?
We had chosen a different cover, but it was very difficult to get the rights for that particular image, which is by a European photographer. So this was the second choice. Anurag Basnet, who's my editor at Rupa, he picked the cover along with the designers there, I guess. And when I showed it to my friends here, they had fallen in love with the previous cover. So they still wanted to revert to that one, but it wasn't possible anymore. But now, now that it's on the book itself, people feel differently about it. And
because it connects to us.
Yeah, I know with which story it resonates, right? So for me it makes sense, but for somebody who's seeing the cover for the first time, it might look like a bit of a strange, it is a strange cover, but I like it. I like it.
How do you feel about the whole writing process when you look back at it? It's 9 stories put together, and I assume they were written at different times over a period.
Yes, and a keen reader would probably be able to tell which ones were written first and which ones were written later. So there are stories here that were written from maybe 2005 till 2013. I was still writing new ones when we were finishing the editing, and then some of the new ones went in. We had to bring back some of the old ones. So it was always a very fluid process that way. Excuse me. You've read Boy from Banoti, you know? So that used to be called by a different name before that, and the first half of it was entirely different. But when we went into the editing process, when I started rewriting it, the story changed. But then the interesting thing about that, I first wrote that story in around 2000 and then lost it. So I didn't have a copy of it anymore. So when we got together for our writing group with Ravidai, Pranab, Pramod Rai, and a couple other people, I had to submit something, so I sat down and recalled the story and rewrote it. So, or stamp and signature, I'd lost it similarly, but Somdai Somdakal, he found it in the suskara.org archives.com archives, and he gave me the text, but then I had moved on in terms of style, in terms of what I wanted to engage with in the stories. So I rewrote that again. But some stories like The Vanishing Act, very minimal change since I wrote it. So it's always a process that surprises you more than conforms to your expectations, I think.
You talked about rewriting. I'm just wondering, you already have a story and then you're recalling and now writing it again from memory, right? How different would the one you wrote the second time be from the one you wrote originally?
It will be different for sure, and that difference is a measure of your growth as a person and as a writer in term. The first version, which Boy from Banoti, which I wrote in 2000, like I said, was only about 2,800 words. This is much longer, and this is actually like edited down version, right? My preoccupation in this story changed. In the earlier version, I wanted to give a very straightforward plot and then maybe shock the reader a little bit. But in this one, I think the preoccupation is more with the description is employed more to sort of slow down the time enough for the reader to see the world as it exists there, and then locate the story in it. So earlier I was more interested in the plot, but I am not as interested in plot anymore. I don't like stories to be led by plot, because I do that in other places. Like in a screenplay, that's all you do. You pile, plots together. But maybe a short story is not the place for it. Maybe a novel would be a better place for it. But what fiction can really do between sentences, with the sounds it can string together, with the images it can recall in the reader's mind, for something like that, if you just focus too much on the plot itself, then maybe your intention gets derailed a little bit. So
what would you say is more important than for a short story if it isn't the plot? Okay,
I'll give you an honest answer and a dishonest answer, and I'll give you the dishonest answer first.
Okay.
I think for a short story, it should be able to accomplish something new each time for the reader. That's my dishonest answer, because I don't even understand what that means myself. My honest answer would be, if you could explain away what a story is supposed to do, what a poem is supposed to do, what a work of art is supposed to do, then you have no impetus to actually create that work. So even when I go back and read my own stories, if I fully understand them, I would probably be bored by them. If there's no mystery left of any kind, Otherwise it becomes a technical manual that can be reproduced like whenever you want to, But there has to be an essential mystery that cannot be explained away. And I think that's what separates a work of art, a created work of art, from other stuff that we have to do anyway, the mundane work that we create. So my honest answer is I wish I could explain that, but I can't, and I'm glad I can't.
How does the writing process work for you? Is there some writers are very disciplined and they have certain number of hours they sit down to write. Others write at really random times and places. How does it work for you?
Most of the time it does not work.
It does not work.
When I'm writing screenplays, then I have to be disciplined, because I'm working with, usually I work with Bhaskar Dongana as a co-writer on our different projects. So when we do that, then every day we come back, he comes back with his ideas and I have to come back with my pages, right? So we sit down and every day we have a set task to accomplish before the next day or the next week or something. So for that there is no other option but to be disciplined. But with writing fiction, you can wait around for inspiration. Maybe it'll come, maybe it won't. Sometimes it does, the very last story in this collection, Condolence Picture, I was drinking tea in Sherpa, Bozanale in Sanepa, when I saw a condolence picture in the newspaper. So that triggered something, and then I went back and started writing it. But a story like The Vanishing Act, I wrote it for a specific purpose, to send to a writing fiction issue that a publication was coming up with. And for that, I didn't have a choice but to sit down and write 3,000 words over a day or two. So I don't have a set process as such, but when I do sit down, I usually tend to write continuously. It's just the sitting down that takes more work.
Okay. Can I ask you to read for our audience from your book?
Sure.
An excerpt.
Page 34. This is from Mayapuri, which you said you liked a lot. This is towards the end. So, death was not trivial in a village where natural death was a rare, celebrated affair, protracted sometimes for weeks as the old refused to make the journey to the world beyond. It was a sin to watch sometimes, the dead being carried away, while it was a sin at other times to not touch someone who just died. But it was always necessary to participate, to join a procession or step out of its way as it followed the wail of a lone conch, winding its way down to the river where the dead were cremated. The homes of the bereaved attained a halo of grief, of being touched by the heavenly in a village preoccupied with the mundane. Everybody waited for the 10th or the 13th day to mark the end of the mourning, a day when salt was welcome again, shared by tongues hurrying to talk of something else than death. After an hour of searching, I reached the river. Several pyres crowded the stretch of the riverbank marked for the dead. Some were already lit, burning black or bright. Men tending the fire, stepping back with smoke-stung eyes, using a length of green bamboo to poke at the logs, break the body into smaller chunks, limbs huddling around the head and the rib cage to burn quicker. Half of the village, women, children included, had gathered to watch. I weaved my way through the crowd, checking for uncles and aunts who might send me home. I steadily crept closer to the pyres, trying to see who was on which pyre by matching the people preparing or tending to the stacks of logs. The tea shop owner who had received the news of the disaster in the morning was standing beside a pyre that seemed prepared, complete, yet unwilling to go, like a student with a full suitcase refusing to board the bus that would take him to a boarding school in the big city. Like a hive of bees reacting to a smoking torch brought under it, the crowd shifted its collective focus to a figure that came running, screaming out of the bushes at the far end of the cremation grounds. My woman. Shirt torn down the front, a gash on her arm, sarong hitched to the knees. She ran towards her husband's pyre. I elbowed my way through the crowd that had congealed at the front to get the best view of what would follow, and ran towards her. The tea shop owner waited near the pyre like a goalkeeper waiting for the football to be shot in his direction. My woman tried to throw herself on the pyre, but the tea shop owner grabbed her, plucked her off the ground, and carried her away. I reached her just then. The tea shop owner lifted his hand as if to backslap me, but when he saw me clinging to the woman, he didn't do anything. Thanks.
Thank you. What do you think about Mayapuri? Is it one of your more controversial stories?
Well, there is no controversy yet because not many people have read it. Maybe there will be when people do read it. It is divisive, like I said earlier. My editor Anurag was really unsettled by it when he read it because he had just become a new father, and there are two stories at the very beginning, both about boyhood and both involving death in some way. And Mayapuri is erotic, and it's about the very strong attraction that a boy of 9 or 10 years old feels about somebody twice his age. So people do react to it, which is probably a good thing, but people react to it in very different ways. Some people hate it, some people love it. Yeah, it is divisive.
I noticed that Kairani appears a lot in your books, and then you talk about boys in a boarding school, and that made me wonder, how far does the autobiographical element go? Because most of the writers I know will be, most writers do pick things out of their own experiences or experiences of those they've known. So.
Yep. Because I'm not a very good writer, it's easier for me if I pick something that I'm familiar with, right? But I'm also, by ambition, by deliberation, somebody who likes to invent. So none of the stories here are real, they're all fiction, but all the settings that you see are real. So there is a story about a boarding school. I went to boarding school for 10 years. I grew up in Kairani before that, so there are stories about Kairani. There are real names that I use of my friends, but none of the things that they're shown doing is real. So I do that because it's sort of, I lay the trap for the reader to fall into, where for them, the real and the unreal starts to blur a little bit. So I've had people come up to me and ask me if the little boy in Mayapuri is me. But that would be a really awkward question to answer, right? If that were true. And it would be really strange if I had actually met a dwarf who vanishes into a sack or if I'd met a woman whose face changes constantly without her being able to control it. But then if you look at more realistic stories like Stamp and Signature or The Game, I haven't lived those lives either. So I use the foundation of the familiar and the real so that I can add like really otherworldly, improbable events to them and have people still believe them.
How do you move from realism into surrealism? Because some writers stick to one kind of writing, but you seem to flip between the two so easily. How do you do that, and with such detail?
Well, that's because I'm stealing from writers better than me. I was reading Murakami, and I was reading Salman Rushdie at the same time. Not to say that there's much like influence of Salman Rushdie in these stories, but I was reading Murakami when I wrote Carolyn Flint, for instance. And I wanted to very deliberately write something of that kind, right? So yeah, I just stole from him, nothing like in particular, but I stole from him the tone and the sort of leap that you have to make from the real into the unreal. But what you need to do is bridge that gap credibly, right? So that what you write doesn't seem so outlandish that people get put off by it. So, like all poor writers, I've been stealing from those who are better than me.
You keep saying that. You've talked about both screenplay and writing. We've compared that already, I think, in a way. But if you had to make a choice between the two kinds of writing, what would you choose?
That's a difficult question. I've always wanted to work in the films. I even thought I would train as an actor once, but I realized how bad I was at it. And I came back to Nepal specifically to direct films, but then after talking to Bhaskar one afternoon, he said, like, why don't you write instead? So we went on this journey where we sort of taught ourselves how to write screenplays, and I'm doing that. But my first, I'm a failed poet too, like I mentioned to you earlier before the cameras were turned on. So, but my first love is still the words,
Your prose is still poetry, as I feel.
Bits of it maybe, but then some people don't like that also. Some people think it's like maybe too much, maybe too purple, which I don't mind. I think we sit, as writers, we sit down and try to, we have on the surface a notion of what we're doing, but we also hope that something happens in the stories, in the poems that we write that we hadn't expected before, right? So that's our participation in the act of actually creating. I would go so far as to say, like, creating something that's never happened before in the universe, and that, but we have only these fixed words already given to us by the language to use. So what we do, what we can accomplish is always with how we use these words again and again and again. And maybe in 1,000 sentences, we will write 2 that will actually feel like we've accomplished something with. And that's still worth going on that journey for, I think. That's probably why I would write at all. Why, even though I fail as a poet, I brought that over into my prose, into my fiction. Why I wouldn't stop like writing screenplays or writing fiction. Because there is no real like worldly reward unless you sell millions of copies. There's always more money to be made doing something else, maybe, right? So why would you write a poem instead? Why would you write why would you write a 150-word poem and still invest yourself fully? Take that risk with yourself. It doesn't matter what people think of it as much as what the work that you've just created can make you feel, right? Or how it changes you or how it affects you. So why would anybody be foolish enough to take that risk over and over again? Because I think it's because of those few instances when we discover ourselves as a different person entirely, as a different being. It sounds very, it doesn't sound like a sane person saying these things, but I think without that bit of insanity, there isn't much to look forward to either. So
I'll have to, I think, interrupt you there, Pravin, because we've run out of time. Would you like to say something to our audience as we about what we can look forward to from you?
Well, I am also one of the assistant editors at Lalit magazine, and I hope you will go out and buy hard copies of that, because the second volume we produced is a collection of short stories with really talented young writers. And if I have the time, I want to quickly add that I will be doing a book signing and a reading sometime soon, but I would also like that to be a book drive for a library which will be built in Khairinitar of Tano. So if you hear any announcement about the book signing that I would be doing, please bring along a couple of second-hand books, old books, whatever you want to donate to the library. I'll be collecting them and sending them to Khairinitar. Thank you.
Thank you, Pravin, for joining us here in our show today.
Thank you, Prateebha. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
So we were talking to Prawin Adhikhari, the writer of The Vanishing Act. Thank you for joining me here today.